a little bit of a different environment today. I'm actually at my church office. I've said before that I also have a job working as a minister, and having to record this here at the church today. So that's where I'm at. That's why I have a bit of a different background here. But hey, I really appreciate you being here for joining in. I really, really do appreciate you giving your time, whether you're watching live or tuning in later. I appreciate you giving your time to watch this. And I hope it's helpful for you. And I'd ask, if you know somebody who's grieving or that could use these videos, please share it with them. Because there's a lot of people out there who are hurting and who probably do need to see this or some of these things. And so share it with somebody if you don't mind. But I do appreciate, again, you being here. Last week, I think I said that we were going to wrap up the group either this week or next week. Had a bit of a change in plans. We're actually going to extend this a couple more weeks past. So I think the last Tuesday of August is actually the last day we're going to do this. Should have had that date up. I guess that would be, the 27th maybe is the last Tuesday. And that's going to be our last day for this. So we're going a couple extra weeks. And we want to help everybody. And there's some other things that we have in store to talk about. So today, I'd like to talk about supporting those who are grieving, supporting the grieving. And one of my coworkers at our counseling site with Joanna Ministries, she suggested this to me. What about giving people tools to help with those who are grieving? So, for example, like if you know somebody who's lost someone, how can you help them? Or if there's someone that you know of that has lost somebody, or somewhere down the line, like a connection with someone who's lost, or you yourself have had a loss. Like what can we do to support those who are struggling, right? So I guess really this is about, if you know somebody who has lost someone or something important to them, what can you do to help them? What are some tools? What are some do's and don'ts of helping those who are grieving? Because let's be honest, like sometimes this can be a real, not just sometimes, probably all the time, this is a tough thing to deal with: loss, losing something important to you or losing somebody important to you. That's hard. And it can kind of be a almost like a taboo thing to talk about. Like, well, we don't want to talk about the loss. We don't know what to do to help somebody through this loss. And so what we want to do is try to give you some tools today to help you. If you know somebody who's grieving, if you know somebody who's struggling, what can you do to help them? We said at the first session that we had that loss and grief touches just about everybody at some point in their lives. And if you yourself haven't lost somebody, you probably know somebody who has, or you're probably closely connected to someone who has lost somebody. And so we're all affected by it in some way. And so it's good to have these tools to know, okay, what can I do to help someone who's lost somebody? What can I do to help someone who's going through grief of losing something important to them? And that's what we want to do today, is to help you, empower you to go out and help someone else. Because this whole group so far has really been focused on those who have lost somebody, and rightly so. That's what we should be focused on, helping those who are grieving. And that's what we've been focused on, those who have actually lost someone. But we haven't really, focused on, okay, what if you know someone who's lost someone? If you know somebody who's experienced loss, what can you do to help them? Like you yourself, what can you do to support them during that time? And that's what we want to talk about here today. And even if, you're here and you have lost somebody, you may learn some tools even from this session here today. So let's get into this. Let's start off with some do's and don'ts of supporting the grieving. Do's and don'ts. And by the way, I don't really know how to spell don'ts. That's kind of a weird word to spell there, so I may have done that wrong. But do's and don'ts of supporting the grieving. Let's start with the don'ts. Things that you don't need to do when you're trying to help someone through their grief. Things you absolutely don't need to do. Number one, don't feel like you have to speak. And I guess I'd add on to that and say, don't speak just to speak, right? Sometimes you don't really have to say anything at all. Just being there is the most helpful thing. So don't feel like you have to speak, or don't feel like you have to say something, because many times we rush into saying something and we end up saying the wrong thing, or we end up just kind of rambling on or trying to have like a quick fix. And there's no quick fix to loss. There's no quick fix to grief. So don't feel like you have to speak, right? Again, just being there, just showing up is something, it can mean all the world to the person who's experiencing the loss. So, you don't feel like you have to. And this may help those who, who don't feel like they know what to say, or you don't feel like, you're good with your words. Well, that's okay. You don't have to be an expert with your words. Sometimes you don't even have to say anything to help somebody. Just your presence being there can really be empowering. But at some point, it probably is going to be helpful for you to speak. So that kind of leads into the second thing. Don't use trite reassurances. Don't use trite reassurances. What we mean by this is like kind of those common sayings that really are empty and don't really have much substance to them. So, for example, like, time heals all wounds, or they're in a better place now, right? Like those types of things, while you may mean well and you may want to help them, you may think that type of thing is helpful. It's really not going to be helpful in the long run. It's really, again, it's just kind of an empty cliche thing to say. And to tell somebody, time heals all wounds in that moment is probably not going to help them get through it, right? For them, time may have slowed down tremendously, and they may feel like this is going to last forever. And you just say, well, just basically you're saying, just wait, it'll get better. That doesn't really help. And then they're in a better place now, right? They may not believe that, right? And so there's some of those kind of cliche things are probably best to avoid during this time. There's a lot more things, right, that could probably be thrown in there, like the trite reassurances. But probably stay away from those things. Even if you mean well, it can be taken in the wrong way. And so don't use those trite reassurances with supporting someone who's grieving. Thirdly, don't share your grief experience, right? Don't share your grief experience. So what's not going to be helpful is if you come in and you say, oh yeah, like I know exactly how you're feeling, right? And then start sharing what you went through. Like, hey, with my loss, I did A, B, C, and D. There can be a time when that's helpful, right? If there is like some significant overlap and you can really identify with them and pull out some points. But for the most part, it's not going to be helpful if you just, start bringing in your experience and you start saying, especially do not say, I know how you feel. I know exactly what you're going through because I went through it. That's not going to be helpful, because we've talked about many times, number one, everyone's grief experience is different. There's no exact 100% same grieving experience. So you don't know exactly what they're going through. And even if there's some similarities, there are differences in your grief experiences. So don't say you know exactly what they're going through or exactly how they feel. Even if you've had some similar feelings, or you've been through a similar thing, it's not going to be the exact same. And what you're doing when you do that, even if you mean well, even if you're trying to help them, it can really pull the focus off of them, and then it's focusing on yourself. Like, oh, well, here's what I did, or here's what happened to me. And really, again, this is their grief experience. And so we need to don't put the focus on ourselves. Don't say that we know how they're feeling or exactly what they're going through. Let's make sure that we're focusing on them. Now, again, there may be some times when it could be helpful to share your experience. I'm just trying to think of an example. Like if someone's grieving the loss of their mother, and maybe you've lost your mother, and after some time, you may say, hey, I'd like to just share, I lost my mom several years ago, and it was really difficult for me, and probably not the exact same as what you're going through. But I think it may be helpful if I shared with you some of the things that I did to get through it, or some of the things that helped me get through it. Those types of things can be helpful. Maybe not right away, but also just being transparent. Like, like, I don't know exactly what you're feeling, but I can give you some help about what I did through my experience. But I guess I'm trying to say, like, don't tell them that you know exactly how they're feeling. Don't rush into looking into your experience. And when you do, be ever aware, like, of their experience and what they're feeling. So that's the third thing. Fourth thing, don't compare their grief to someone else's. This is kind of building on that. Don't try to, like, compare it with your grief or someone else that like, hey, I know somebody else who lost their grief. Man, they really were hurting through this just like you are, or man, they were hurting way more. So that's not going to be helpful, right? To compare their grief to someone else's grief, because again, everyone's experience is different. And in their loss, they probably don't want to hear about somebody else's grief experience, because they're going through something real intense and real hurtful themselves. They probably don't want to have their experience compared with someone else's, right? They probably don't want to hear about someone else's experience during this time, because they are hurting so deeply. So don't compare their grief experiences to someone else's. Fourthly or fifthly here, don't give them unsolicited advice. So if they ask for advice, they say, well, what would you do? Or, what did you do during, your loss? Well, then, yeah, give them advice. Right. But if it's not asked for, be careful with giving advice. I guess I won't say don't ever give advice, but be very careful in giving advice, because sometimes advice doesn't work out, right? As counselors, many people think that it's our job that we're advice givers, that we tell people what to do. That's really not what we do as counselors. We don't tell people what to do, right? Because there's a lot of reasons why, but one of the main reasons why is because our advice, what we tell people to do, could technically backfire, could actually turn out to not work. And it could turn out bad. And then they could come back and say, hey, you told me to do this and it didn't work out. Right. So, as counselors, one of the things that we do is someone says, hey, what would you do in this situation? Like, if it could be a number of examples, but what would you do? We kind of turn it back on them. We say, well, you tell me, right? What would you do? What do you think is the right response here? Or we say something like, well, it doesn't really matter what I would do. What matters is what you would do, right? And maybe not word it exactly that way in this type of situation, but it's basically what we're trying to do is let them figure it out themselves instead of us feeding them what to do or telling them what to do. We want to try to help them see, hey, you've got it within you. You've got the tools within you. You've got the answers within you to work through this. And we want to help them come up with solutions themselves instead of us kind of, spoon feeding it to them or giving it to them. So advice giving can sometimes backfire, right? Now, again, sometimes it's appropriate. Again, if they ask you, hey, what did you do in your grief experience? Well, maybe it's a good time to share that. But maybe it may be also helpful to say, well, my experience was different. So what do you think you should do here? And then if they can't figure it out, well, then, yeah, maybe give some advice. But I guess all I'm saying is advice isn't always a bad thing, but sometimes it can be unhelpful, especially if they don't ask for it and you're just popping out advice, right? That might not be the best thing for them. They might not want to hear that, right? So be careful with advice giving. And then finally, don't tell them they're grieving incorrectly. And I guess that's kind of worded weirdly there. You probably would never tell somebody, hey, you're doing this wrong, like up front, right? And be that upfront with it. But we may do some things that try to maybe speed them along, right? Or we may kind of act like, hey, you need to be in a different spot now. Or, after 6 months or something, like, hey, you really need to be in a better place. Or, you've been grieving just way too long on this. Or you've been depressed for way too long. That's not gonna be helpful. Right. Again, everyone's process is different. Some people stay sad for longer than others. Some people stay in denial longer than others. And just being aware of that and being able to just be patient with them is really, really important. So these are some don'ts, and there could be a lot more probably, but these are some of the ones that I think were really important to share. Um, and Again, there probably are some more online that you could look at, but just trying to help you with some things like you may feel pressured to speak. Well, you don't have to. You may be pressured to use those trite reassurances. Don't have to. You may feel like you have to share your experience. Well, you don't necessarily have to. That may be appropriate, but you don't necessarily have to. So on and so forth. And so hopefully those are a little bit helpful. But now I'd like to look at some do's, some things that you should do in helping those who are grieving. So, number one is do show up regularly. Do show up regularly. I was saying a minute ago, right? You don't feel like you have to speak. Don't feel like you have to talk. Just showing up, just being consistent and showing up is going to be really, really important. Like sometimes people just need a shoulder to cry on. Sometimes people just want someone to be there. That's so very helpful just to show up for them. And sometimes it may not even be in person. I would encourage it to be in person. Like if you can actually visit with them, if you can actually be with them in person, that'd be the most helpful. But even a phone call here and there, even a text here and there, and mixing it up, like if you have to, visit them and then call them later, so on and so forth. Like just showing up regularly, especially in those first month and the first weeks and months, showing up regularly is really, really important. Um, because they need that connection, they need that support. And so just being there, you don't even have to say anything sometimes, is so very important. Just to know that they can have a consistent person to rely on is so very important and reassuring for them. So just show up regularly. Secondly, just listen carefully. This is so incredibly important. It goes along again with the talking about you don't have to speak. You do not have to say anything sometimes. Really, what people need most is for you to be there and just listen. Just be there and give them your ear. That's basically it. Like if you can just be there and listen to them, that is going to be so much greater than anything you can say, really. So just be there and listen. That is really important, and really listen carefully. Like pick up on the details and empathically listen. Like step into their world and try to see it from their perspective and feel for them. That is really, really important here. So do listen very carefully. Thirdly, do offer practical assistance, right? Again, more than giving advice or talking, what's going to be really helpful for them is helping them with the practical things of life, right? Because when many people, when they've lost someone, they don't want to do anything. They don't want to cook anymore. They don't want to run errands. They don't want to keep the house clean. So doing things like that for them can be very, very, very helpful and be some of the best things that you can do for them is, cooking meals for them and dropping off food, picking up the kids for them, bringing them home, cleaning up their house for them, taking care of the errands, so on and so forth, helping them with the bills, right? These types of things can be so very important, like the practical things that I think sometimes get overlooked, right? We may think, well, I just need to be there for them and talk with them, which is very important, just being there. We just talked about that. But also sometimes we forget that they may not want to do the regular tasks that they normally do, right? They may be so tired and worn out and distressed that they don't want to do any of those things. So offer that practical assistance. That could be of great help to someone who is grieving. Do respect their requests as well, right? If they request like, hey, I'd like to just have some alone time, well, then give them that alone time, right? If they request some help, like try your best to figure that out for them. But respect their requests, respect their wants and wishes during this time, even if it's not what's best for them. Try to respect what they're saying, and try to, continue to reach out, continue to show up. Like what I'm saying, what I mean by that, I guess, if it's not the best for them, they may say, well, I really just want some alone time, just to be alone. And you can respect that and also try to still help them see that it's important to kind of come out and be around others. But respect that request, right? Like, I hear what you're saying, and I'll give you some alone time. But I do think that at some point we probably need to spend some time together. We probably need to get you out, right? So respect their request. And there's some other things, like, again, if they're requesting some help, you try to get them that help. And if they have some way that they're grieving, respect that, even if it's different, if it's not the quote unquote normal thing, respect their requests. Also, do seek professional help if needed, right? There are some situations in which counseling is needed where, some professional help, pastoral counseling, something like that would be needed. And they may not see that they need it, or they may see that they need it, but they may not feel like reaching out. They may not feel like picking up the phone and calling. They may not feel like driving to a counseling site and seeing somebody. They may not feel like getting the computer out and getting on a telehealth appointment or something like that. So you may have to help them with that, right? And it's important to see the signs of, okay, they're in need of professional help now. Like, this is beyond my scope of help, and I need to get them to somebody. I need to help them get to this point to see a professional, and I need to do whatever I can to get them there. And it may mean helping them or getting them there, driving them there. It may be setting up the computer for them and getting them on a telehealth appointment, whatever it may be. But seek professional help. And certainly, again, we at Joanna Snow Ministries, we want to help people, and so we can definitely do some counseling with those who are grieving, and that's what we love to do. And so, if you know someone who's grieving and needs that professional help, reach out to us. There's so many other places here in Mobile as well, but we want to get those people help who need help. So seek professional help if needed. And we can talk about in just a minute too some of the signs. Well, you know what? Let me actually just touch on that a little bit. Like, we talked about complicated grief, where people kind of get stuck in this prolonged sadness and prolonged distress and depression. And when complicated grief comes, that there definitely needs to be some professional help. Sorry, here, my eye is itching. They need some professional help at that point. Also, if you see like a significant withdrawal from people and no social contact, right? They're probably in need of some professional help. If you see, and we're going to talk about in just a second some of the stages, and that's where some of this could probably come in again. If they're kind of stuck in a stage and can't get out, right, then maybe it's time for some professional help. Again, everybody grieves differently, and so some will stay in some stages longer than others, and but there can be some times when it's unhealthy to stay in a stage, right? If somebody's in like a stage of denial for months and months and months, then they're probably needing some professional help to work through that. So we can talk more about that too in just a minute, but those are just kind of some signs to look for. And it may be, just kind of mentioning to them, what do you think about counseling, right? What do you think about seeing a professional? Even if you haven't recognized any signs, right? It may just be something helpful to mention to them and see what they think. But we'll move on now. Do also talk about the deceased. I know this one's really hard because it's uncomfortable. Like, should I bring up the person who passed away? Should I bring up the thing that they lost? Like, it's kind of an uncomfortable thing to do, but avoiding it is actually going to be more harmful than addressing it, right? So do talk about the deceased or what that person lost. It doesn't have to be, a person that they lost, right? And what could be helpful here is, talking about those memories, right? The fond memories of that person, and just to carry on their memory with them, and talk about your fond memories of that person who passed away, or the thing that they lost, and ask them about some of those memories they had with them. And it may bring up tears, y'all. It may bring up tears, right? And that's okay, right? Allow them to cry. And again, you don't even have to say anything. give them a hug, give them a pat on the back, and just let them know that you're there. But do talk about the deceased. Don't avoid it. Don't try to shy away from that. Allow them to talk about the person, because that person that they lost or whatever they lost is important to them. And we need to be able to talk about the things that are important to us. And so it's okay to talk about the deceased and bring that up. And don't feel like you have to shy away from that. So I'm not saying that has to be the focus of every conversation, and like you're bringing that up every time. But what I'm saying is you don't have to feel uncomfortable. Like, tell me about, some of the memories that you had with so and so, or at your job that you lost, whatever. Or, that's okay. Be okay to talk about those things. Do watch for depression and suicidal ideation. So be very watchful for someone who is really starting to sink into depression. Now, that's one of the stages. So people are going to have sadness, but there can be some intense sadness, prolonged withdrawal, and it can kind of suck somebody in, and it can really lead them further down a rabbit hole of distress. And so watch for that, and also watch out for suicidal ideation. If they start saying that they're going to harm themselves, or they just want this all to be over and they want to, leave and things like that. So watch for that and get the help quickly, right? Report that to, and I should have had this on here. But we, as counselors, we're required to report those who have that suicidal ideation that are going to harm themselves or harm somebody else. And I should have had those numbers on here. But you can call it just the authorities, right? Like the 911, or, you can call a mental health professional and try to get them help that way. So be watchful for depression and suicidal ideation. Also, do prepare to help with triggers. There are going to be some things that are going to trigger their anxiety, trigger their sadness, trigger their symptoms of negative symptoms. And be watchful for that, and be on the lookout, and be willing to help them, and also help them kind of stay away from those triggers. I'm not saying, let me backtrack there. We don't want to avoid the things that are going to trigger our anxiety, because that's actually going to lead to more anxiety. Because if we avoid it, then we'll avoid it that first time, and then we say, yeah, you know what? I had that temporary relief because I avoided that place or that thing. And then each time we're just going to become more and more of a lookout for that place or that thing, and we're going to continue to avoid it. And so I guess what really we need to do here is help them work through the triggers, right? And I guess at some point, avoidance is okay, meaning like we don't want to like intentionally go to a place that's going to trigger them, or show them something that's going to trigger them, right? That would not be a good thing. But there are going to be triggers out there. And so we need to be prepared to help them through that. The things that are going to kind of spike that anxiety, that depression, that sadness, from giving them a reminder of what they lost. And that can lead them into some really negative symptoms. So be ready to help with those things. And also, we'll talk about this here in just a second too, but like watching out for those anniversaries and holidays is going to be really, really important. And we'll talk more about that here in just a second. So those are some do's and don'ts. Again, this is not an exhaustive list, but this is just some things. The next thing I would do is just give you some other helpful things to know. Okay, these are some other helpful things to know. Number one is the stages of grief. All right, and we talked about that in, I think it was our second session. So it's been 3 or 4 weeks now that we talked about the stages of grief. But there have been a ton of models proposed of how people move through grief, like these different stages or different levels of grief. And it's good to be familiar with some of those. And I'm about to pull up one here on the next slide to show you those stages of grief, just to be familiar with those things, just to know the possible progression that they could make, or the possible things that they are likely going to fall into. Now, again, with the stages of grief, it's not always a uniform thing. It's not always a linear thing. Like they move from stage 1 to stage 2, then to stage 3, stage 4. It could be in stage 1, then they go to stage 2, and then back to 1 for a little bit, and then up to 3, and then back to 2, right? It could go back and forth. But just to have a knowledge of those stages of grief, just so you can know, like, okay, this is possibly what they're going to be working through. This, and you can be aware of like the signs of, okay, now they moved out of denial. Now they're in depression, or now they're in acceptance, whatever it may be. So we'll look at Kubler-Ross's stages of grief here in just a little bit on the next slide. But be familiar with those stages of grief. There's some really helpful things to know there. We'll look at that here in just a second, just to remind you of that. Also, understand that certain days will absolutely be harder than others. There are going to be days, and this kind of plays on to what I was just saying a minute ago with the triggers. There are going to be days that are going to spike their anxiety, their depression, their sadness, all those things. Think about like the anniversary of someone's death, right? The day that person died. When it comes up a year later, that's going to be a hard day. Think about the loved one that they lost their birthday, right? That's going to be a tough day. Holidays like Christmas. So understand that those days are triggers, and those things can't be avoided. They're going to happen, right? Those days are going to show up on the calendar. So understand that those days are going to be harder than others. And those are the days in particular where you're going to really need to reach out, where you're really going to need to just be there for them and support them. And maybe it's taking them out somewhere, getting their mind off of it a little bit, but also helping them understand it's okay to be sad. It's okay for them to feel and to feel like this during this time. It's a normal response. Everybody would be sad in the anniversary of someone's death, or on the anniversary of someone's death, or like on a holiday or their birthday, or an anniversary, like a marriage anniversary, a wedding anniversary. So some days are going to be harder than others. Let me add on to this by saying this as well. It is really important to help someone in those first few weeks of grief, because that's when it's like for most people, really intense. But what I have found, being in ministry, we have a lot of people, in our congregation who pass away, or we have a lot of people in our congregation who have loved ones who pass away. And what we find is that, people are really good within the first few weeks of reaching out and helping. But then in the following months and the following years, they kind of go unnoticed, or the loss kind of gets lost, if you will. And people aren't reaching out as much. But we have to say, like, grief and loss last longer for most people. And by most people, I mean like 99.99% of people. Grief lasts longer than just 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 4 weeks even. It lasts a long time. And so, yes, it's really important to know that those first few weeks are going to be really important for you to be there for them. But also in the following weeks, at week 4 or 5 or 6, when a lot of people have kind of retracted and have not been reaching out as much, keep your eye on that person, right? Because grief doesn't just stop, right? They're not just going to forget about it after a month or two. So those weeks after those first weeks are also really important, like to help them not slip back down into that. So be aware of that, and reach out in those following weeks. And something that may be helpful is, if for example, like if you have a church, what we do here is like we do a meal train for people who lose loved ones or have tough things going on, and people can sign up to take these people a meal. And what typically happens is we do it for like a couple weeks, and for 2 weeks, it's like really good. People are bringing food and so on and so forth. But what could really be helpful is, like after that, like the week 3, week 4, when people have not signed up to bring meals, if you go and show up and do that, like that's really, really important, because the grief doesn't just stop. So I thought that was also really helpful to know. I didn't put that necessarily in the slide, but I thought it kind of went with this one as well, that certain days are going to be harder than others. Also know that no one grieves the exact same. And I've kind of already mentioned that, but basically what we mean by that is that you may have been through grief yourself. You may have helped somebody through grief before, but that doesn't mean that the person now that's grieving is going to grieve the exact same way, right? For example, this is just a simple example. You may have worked through your grief and come to the acceptance stage within a year, right? What may take somebody else a year and a half, may take somebody else 2 years, right? You may have moved through, or you may know somebody who moved through the stages pretty much in like a linear progression. They went from stage 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5, and they kind of worked through it and had counseling and so on and so forth. Whereas somebody else may work through one stage and get to stage 3 and then go back, and they're kind of a hodgepodge in these stages. So people are going to grieve differently, and so don't try to press on them this way to grieve, or like, hey, this is how you have to do it, right? No one grieves the exact same. Everyone's situation is different. The details of the loss are different. The intricacies of their lives are different. So like, don't just jump in and say like, you know that you know how they're grieving and that this is how they should do it, right? Everyone's experience is different, and be aware of that. Also understand that people need connection. So one of the things that is pretty normal when someone loses someone or loses something important to them is to withdraw from society, from people, and that can actually be more hurtful. We've talked about this. We're doing a couples group on Fridays, and so maybe you've tuned into both of these groups, but on Fridays we've been talking about couples and things to help couples. And one of the things that we've talked about a few times at least is that we were made to be in relationship with other people, right? That's just how we are. God created us to be in connection with others. And that is really an important thing to be in connection. Studies have shown that social support, having people, is a protective factor, meaning it protects from anxiety, it protects from depression and other things like that. I'm not saying that that's going to heal all things, but it's definitely one of those things that can be very helpful, is to connect. And here's what I'm not saying. I'm not saying drag this person to a party, right? What I'm saying is try to help someone who's lost someone or lost something important to them. Try to help them stay connected to people in some way, shape, form, or fashion. Try to help them stay in connection with you, and have regular meetings with people, have regular conversations with people, because withdrawing and retracting is actually going to hurt them in the long run, right? Isolation, right? We found out in COVID that isolation was hurting people, right? Because we were missing that social connection. We are social creatures. We need other people. We build off of one another, and we find so much strength from one another. So try to help connect them with people. Maybe it's connecting them with a support group. Maybe it's connecting them with people at church. Maybe it's just you going over there with them, or going out, taking them out with friends, whatever it may be. But understand that people do need that connection. I may also say this, like, don't rush that. Like it may be like right off the bat, it may not be helpful to rush them right into spending a bunch of time with people. But make sure what I'm saying is not to let them continue to retract and continue to withdraw. Try to get them around people and to be with people. So I said I wanted to look at some stages of grief, because again, I think this is really helpful. And I'm not going to go over this, very long here, because I had a whole video on that several weeks ago. So you can go back on our page on Facebook or on YouTube, and you can look at the stages of grief that we talked about there. But I did want to kind of just touch on that, because I think it's important, a helpful thing to know, these stages of grief, just so that you can have an idea again of what to look for, what they may be going through. So probably the most well-known stage of grief proposed was by a woman named Kubler-Ross, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. I don't even know if I'm saying that right. I said that a few weeks ago. I think she's like a Swiss American psychologist, and I think this may have been done in the 60s, if I remember correctly. But she proposed this model for these stages that people move through as they grieve. And again, it's not always a linear thing. It's not always going from denial to anger to bargaining, depression, and acceptance. Sometimes it's kind of a mix match thing here, where someone goes through denial, but they're also angry, and then they move back or they move to bargaining, but then they move back into anger, and so on and so forth. So, but this is just kind of a framework, again, to understand what grief looks like for most people, or looks like for a lot of people. And that's really what it is. And so I kind of talked about that in the past video. So go watch that, about trying to understand why people have proposed these models. But let me just kind of touch on these real quick. So really, one of the first things you'll see is denial or shock. And that's kind of this idea, like, I cannot believe that this has happened to me, this hasn't happened to me. I'm going to wake up one day and it's all going to be a dream, or it's all going to be, something that really didn't happen. I'm going to wake up and it's going to be gone, right? It's denying it, right? And honestly, denial can be helpful for a time. So but staying in that denial can really be harmful. So denial, it can be kind of like a buffer for what's coming next, right? These deep feelings. So instead of just kind of being flooded with it, you kind of have this denial period where you're, again, like kind of like a buffer for these feelings that are coming later. But staying in denial, right, is not going to be helpful, because that's, again, denying reality, denying that the loss happened. So that's not going to be helpful to stay in that stage forever. Anger is the next stage, where you move from, most people do move from denial into these feelings of anger. And right, this is a normal thing. Why wouldn't you be angry about losing something or somebody that was important to you, right? So having these intense feelings of resentment and anger and frustration about your loss. And things here may be things like, why me? Like, why did this happen to me? Why did I have to lose A, B, C, or D, right? So anger, and that's a really a normal thing. Again, like, I think that's a normal human reaction, to be angry at losing something important to you. But that is a typical stage that people get to. The next one that Kubler-Ross says here is bargaining. And this is like basically some behaviors to try to get back the person that was lost, or trying to make like a deal with God, for example, to win back this person, or this thing that was lost, or kind of like asking these questions in your mind, like, what if I would have done something differently, or if only I could have the person back, then I would do A, B, C, or D, right? Those types of things are kind of going on here in bargaining. And again, I think this is a normal thing, right? To think about what could have been, or if only you could get the person back, things that you would do, right? What would you would do differently, right? So bargaining is the next stage. Then you get into depression. And again, this is a normal thing for people to experience as they've lost someone or something important to them, to be depressed, to have that withdrawal, to have that intense sadness, that intense, maybe crying spells, and really just feeling empty, right? Depression is something that many people feel, right? You lose someone important to you. You'll never see them again, right? That hurts. You lose a job that you love, that really, really hurts. And so to have those feelings are normal, right? But that is a common stage people face. And then acceptance. And acceptance is eventually someone is able to work through these feelings of depression and the anger and so on and so forth, and they're able to accept that the loss has happened, and they're able to integrate that into their life and move on in life, right? Moving on in life does not mean that they forget about the loss, or don't think about it. It just means that they're able to carry that with them. It's a part of who they are. They've accepted it, and they're moving on in life as well. So unfortunately, not all people get to the acceptance stage. Most people do, but about, I think, 10% end up getting in complicated grief, where they're stuck in the intense feelings of sadness and denial and anger and so on and so forth. So I wanted to show this to you because, again, this could just kind of give you a framework for, okay, this is what to look for. This is maybe what stage they're in right now. And then maybe you could see, okay, well, they were in the depression stage, but now they're back into the anger stage, right? Or, okay, they seem to be working their way to acceptance. This is good. Like, they've worked through these feelings. Or, they may be angry, and then you may notice, okay, wait, they're kind of showing some more signs of denial. Just kind of gives you a framework to look through, to show you, like, okay, this is what they may be feeling. This is what they may be going through in the stage that they're in. So that's why I kind of wanted to show this to you. And I looked at a couple weeks ago. Again, go look at that video. But we looked at William Worden's tasks of grieving. And some have added on to Kubler-Ross's stages and have done 7 stages of grief and added a couple of things. So there's different stages out there. But again, they're just frameworks for helping us understand what someone is possibly going through. Again, it's not always a neat thing, and doesn't always work out in these stages. And and maybe it's going to be different for every person. But again, it just kind of helps you be aware of what to look for and what they could possibly be going through. So I hope that this was helpful for you, and I hope that you learn with some of those do's and don'ts, right? That there's some things to do and things not to do when helping someone and supporting someone who is grieving. And let me say that was it's not that was not like an exhaustive list there of those things, because there are some other things that could be helpful there. And there's a lot of great resources online. But be careful, because not everything online is trustworthy. I think we know that. But I hope that one thing I'd encourage us to do as I close is to be looking out for those who are hurting, to be looking out for those who are struggling, who may have lost something. And I also encourage you to look out. It's easy to identify those who have lost a loved one, right? It's kind of easy to see that. But it's a little bit harder to notice some other things that people have lost, like they've lost a job, or somebody may have had a miscarriage, which is losing a life. But that's not as easy to notice, right? Because that child was in their womb. It's not easy to notice, like somebody losing a job unless they tell you up front. So maybe look for those signs, look for those things, and help them through their process, right? Because I think sometimes we think that, people can only grieve the loss of a loved one, but people can grieve the loss of so many other things. And we need to be aware of that and cognizant that people can grieve a lot of different things, and they may be going through some of these feelings, right? So be aware of that and be on the lookout, and reach out and support people and help people. And I would encourage you one last time here, just show up, just be there for them, sit with them in their grief and listen to them. And that can be the most helpful thing to that person. Really appreciate you tuning in here today. Really, really do. Again, I appreciate you giving your time. If you've got any feedback, let us know. If you've got questions, I keep forgetting to say this. If you've got questions, let us know. Tell us what your questions are, and we will try to answer those questions. Maybe we can even do a Q&A, like some questions about grief or some questions about the process, and we can maybe answer those. So if you have questions, send them our way, maybe in the comment section on Facebook or YouTube, or email us at info@joannasnow.com. Or, call us, let us know if you have any questions, or if you have something that you want to talk about, you think of a great topic, let us know. We want to talk about things that are salient to you and things that you could think would be helpful. So let us know. But again, really appreciate you having a